The DC universe has existed in one form or another for almost 100 years now, and in that time we've been treated to some wonderful iconic characters. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, to name but a few. But for every Titan, there are countless obscure characters who failed to leave the same mark on the public consciousness. How many people remember characters like Woozy Winks, Jackanapes, or Ibis the Invincible, for instance? A few devoted fans perhaps, but for most, these names are forgotten footnotes in DC's history. One of these obscure characters, a Firestorm villain no less, languished in obscurity for decades. That is, until James Gunn plucked him out and added him to the roster of villains seen in his film The Suicide Squad, and subsequently Creature Commandos. We're talking about Weasel. Let's start with the comic book version of Weasel, who only made a handful of appearances before he was unceremoniously killed off. He first appeared in 1985's The Fury of Firestorm 35, in a prelude to an upcoming story in which half of Firestorm, Professor Martin Stein, took up a teaching job at Stanford University. However, Stein didn't realise that a serial killer was operating in the area, targeting the university's faculty and any watchmen unfortunate enough to stumble upon him. Coroners reported that the victims looked like they had been savaged by a wild animal, and Weasel's appearance certainly validated that point of view. This original version of Weasel was a mere man in a costume, John Monroe, who had been a peer of Stein's and the other victims. Monroe sought revenge after they had mocked him in his youth, calling him a weasel. Monroe tried to move past their mockery by focusing on his studies, eventually becoming a university lecturer, but their cruel words lingered, leaving him deeply self-conscious and angry. Fearing he'd never achieve tenure, Monroe created the identity of the Weasel to eliminate his competition and take revenge on those who mocked him. Acting like a savage beast, he tore his victims apart. As the Weasel, he targeted the people who had bullied him and eventually tried to kill Stein, unaware that Stein was half of Firestorm, the nuclear man. This would lead to his defeat. The sad fact was that Stein had absolutely no recollection of Monroe, even when he was unmasked. He couldn't remember ever calling him a weasel, or anyone else doing it for that matter. It's a poignant reminder that offhand remarks, meant to be harmless, can linger in the minds of the person being mocked. In his next appearance, however, Weasel was completely different. Following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, much of DC's continuity was reimagined. One of the characters significantly changed was the Weasel, who went from a man in a costume to a half-man, half-weasel creature with a taste for human flesh. He was recruited to the Suicide Squad for one mission during a special crossover with the Doom Patrol, and he didn't survive the mission. In 2009, he made a handful of background appearances during the Blackest Night crossover, where deceased DC characters were resurrected as Black Lanterns. The Weasel didn't make any major contributions to the storyline, but if you look closely in a few pages, he can be seen standing around. When DC reset their continuity a second time as part of the New 52 era, Weasel made a very brief appearance during the Forever Evil storyline, when Earth's heroes were banished and the villains took over. Weasel was a member of Cheetah's animal-themed group The Menagerie, but his appearance was brief. He lunged at Steve Trevor, who shot him, and then was frozen by Killer Frost and left to die. A recurring theme for the character, it seems. Outside of the comic books, Weasel made some brief appearances in HBO's Harley Quinn and Kite Man series. He was only ever background dressing, a nice little reference for fans who have memorized the obscure corners of DC's character roster. Weasel's most significant appearance came in James Gunn's film The Suicide Squad, released in 2021. Weasel was a recruit in Amanda Waller's new version of Task Force X, the more socially acceptable name for the Suicide Squad. Rick Flag notes that while Weasel seems spaced out and unaware of what's going on, he's okay with joining them on their dangerous mission to Corto Maltese. Some eyebrows were raised because Weasel doesn't seem to actually understand spoken words and is incapable of speaking. He seems happy enough though. Despite his amiable, vacant nature, Weasel was convicted of murdering 27 children according to Flag, so he's presumed to be dangerous. His teammates weren't entirely sure what to make of him. Some thought he was a big smart dog, Harley Quinn figured he might be a werewolf, and Flag thinks he is a weasel of sorts. Weasel was thought to be the first member of the squad to die when the team were dropped into the ocean, and nobody thought to check if he could swim. While Savant tried to save him, Weasel seemed to drown and was unresponsive. However, in one of the post-credit scenes, Weasel woke up, coughed up a couple of lungfuls of water, and then wandered off into the jungle. Much like the comic books, the continuity of the live-action DC films is a bit of a mess at the moment. Note that the Suicide Squad was part of the line of DC films referred to as the DC Extended Universe. After some high-profile box office failures, this series was rebooted. Now, James Gunn is in control, and only select parts of the DCEU are canon, mostly things that he wrote like the Suicide Squad and the spin-off show Peacemaker, although there are some exceptions. All of this brings us to Creature Commandos, the first series in James Gunn's new DC Cinematic Universe, imaginatively titled The DC Universe. The idea behind this universe is that most projects across film, television, including animation, and video games will be part of the same continuity. Creature Commandos picks up after the events of the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. Amanda Waller has been forbidden from sending superpowered humans into conflict zones, which is an order she takes very seriously. Instead, she creates a new team, Task Force M, consisting entirely of supervillains that aren't technically human beings. The Bride, Dr. Phosphorus, G.I. Robot, Nina Mazursky, and Weasel, headed by Rick Flag Sr. The Commandos are sent to the Eastern European country of Pokolistan, where they're tasked with defending the country's princess from the Amazonian witch Circe and her army of dude bros, the Sons of Themyscira. Weasel doesn't contribute much to the first couple of episodes, he mostly sits around and stares blankly into space, but when it comes time for a fight, he can be pretty brutal. Weasel's biggest moment comes in the series' 4th episode, where we are shown some of his backstory. Amazingly, the series transforms this goofy, awkward character into one of its most tragic and emotionally resonant figures. The series introduces Weasel's lawyer, who is convinced that he's a human being and is trying to get him out of prison. She refers to him as John Doe, the name given to unidentifiable corpses, although his criminal records from the Suicide Squad name him as John Monroe. Presumably, that was erased from continuity alongside Batfleck and Henry Cavill's Superman. The lawyer shows Weasel photographs of his supposed victims and asks him if he recognizes them. We are then shown that Weasel was not a child killer. Instead, he was a simple-minded creature befriended by school children who thought he was some sort of dog. His weird appearance didn't bother them. They enjoyed playing with him, and he never tired of their company. However, when an adult spotted the children playing with Weasel, he assumed the worst and called the police, thinking that the children were being harmed by a massive beast. The adult took it upon himself to try to rescue the children, but ended up sparking a fire that led to a huge explosion that killed almost all of them. While Weasel was wounded, he overcame his injuries to try and rescue a little blonde-haired girl who had been particularly affectionate towards him. He did his best to drag her free from the burning rubble. When the police arrived, all they saw was a bunch of dead kids with another in the jaws of a hideous beast, and they opened fire. Weasel didn't understand what was happening and did all he could to get his friends away from the mean men with guns. Despite being shot several times himself, he wouldn't give up on saving his friend even if it meant his own death. This was all a huge misunderstanding, with people making assumptions about Weasel based on his appearance. Rather than focusing on saving the alleged victim, the adults directed their energy towards capturing Weasel, and it resulted in the little girl's death under a pile of burning rubble. Watching Weasel desperately claw at the ground as he tried to save the girl, only to witness her death, was devastating. And this despair is compounded by the fact that we're shown that Weasel dreams about that night. So bravo James Gunn for making me feel so deeply about an insignificant Firestorm villain reimagined as a mute comedy figure in the Suicide Squad. Weasel makes a connection between the dead little girl and Ilana Rostovic, the princess of Pokolistan, and he does everything in his power to protect her. He is the one that takes down Circe with his relentless savagery, allowing Dr. Phosphorus to leave his mark on the witch. When armed with the knowledge of his backstory, it makes the earlier scene where Ilana plays with Weasel all the more touching. And when Circe reveals why she has to kill Ilana, she was going to be the instigator of a world war that the USA would lose, the Commandos were ordered to kill her. But Weasel wouldn't let it happen. He chose to give away the team's position to alert the princess to the threat to her life, which led to the death of his kind teammate Nina. He was hailed as a hero in Pokolistan for his efforts to save the princess, one they loudly proclaimed they would commemorate with monuments to his bravery, even though Ilana was a monster. Still, the team didn't hold it against him. They knew he was a good boy who rarely understood what he was doing. He's pretty lucky that he didn't cause himself some serious harm when he bit Dr. Phosphorus. Ultimately, Weasel's journey is a testament to James Gunn's ability to breathe life into the most unlikely characters. What began as a minor Firestorm villain, forgotten by most, me included, has become a tragic and oddly relatable figure. He's a misunderstood creature judged by his appearance and striving for connection in a world that fears him. Creature Commandos doesn't just reinvent Weasel, it turns him into a symbol of redemption and resilience. If this is what James Gunn can do with Weasel, it's exciting to think about what's in store for the future of the DC universe. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time, Friday's video will be my Valentine's Day special, in which a group of DCAU experts gather to discuss the most important question: who is Batman's true love? The answer may surprise you. And next Monday I'll be back with another video about the villain scene in 2013's overlooked Batman cartoon, Beware the Batman. This time I'll be looking at the devilish Professor Pig to highlight how different he was from his comic book counterpart. Hope to see you then.